They didn't fire me, not exactly. That would have made it obvious. No, they buried the knife slow, smiled while doing it too, said they were realigning priorities and offering me new challenges. But I knew what it was. A quiet execution. And I wasn't about to take it lying down. My name's Brad Keener. I'm 34, born and raised in Indiana, the kind of guy who still holds the door open for strangers and remembers his high school shop teacher's birthday. I moved to the city 10 years ago with a mechanical engineering degree, a second-hand Ford Focus, and more ambition than sense. I worked my way up. Late nights, missed weddings, ruined relationships, all for the job. I was a lead systems engineer, and I loved what I did. Maybe too much. Turns out, in the corporate world, being indispensable makes you dangerous. And dangerous people don't last long in front of fragile egos. It started with a meeting, a quick chat with my boss, Alan. He was the kind of guy who wore Patagonia vests over pressed dress shirts, the human embodiment of LinkedIn hustle culture. Charismatic, calculated, always with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. I walked into his office on a Tuesday afternoon. The blinds were half drawn, his desk too clean, like he'd prepped the stage for something rehearsed. "Brad," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. "You've been killing it. Mantis wouldn't be where it is without you." Mantis. That was our major project, a complex drone interface system being fast-tracked for government deployment. I'd been with it from the beginning, designed the control logic, helped shape the sensor integration, personally oversaw every systems test. I sacrificed sleep, relationships, even a vacation to see my dying uncle, all for that launch. Mantis wasn't just code and circuits. It was mine. Alan leaned forward. "We've been thinking about your next step. You've outgrown engineering, Brad. We want to give you something bigger, more strategic." I waited. There was always a but in these kinds of speeches. He smiled. "We're moving you into a cross-functional role in internal systems optimization. You'll report directly to Eva in Ops. It's a high-visibility lane." Ops? That wasn't a promotion. That was a shelf. A padded corner for people they wanted out of the way without the paperwork of termination. I looked at him, deadpan. "You're taking me off Mantis?" "It's not about taking you off," he said, lacing his fingers together. "It's about broadening your impact." Bullshit. My badge stopped opening the engineering lab the next morning. The team I led for 3 years didn't even get notified. I was out, just like that. Reassigned, replaced, forgotten. I sat in a beige conference room for 3 hours that week debating printer lease contracts, while some smug 27-year-old PM named Jason stepped into my role like he'd earned it. That's when something broke in me. I wasn't just angry, I was awake. At first, I thought about quitting, walking out the front door, middle finger high, letting the door hit me square in the ass. But I didn't. Because quitting would have meant giving them exactly what they wanted. An easy exit, no questions, no resistance. And more than anything, I wanted them to feel what I felt. Sidelined, devalued, erased. So I stayed. Quietly, patiently. I showed up, I smiled in meetings, I took notes like a good soldier, and all the while, I listened. I watched, I waited. In Ops, people underestimated me. They thought I was another over-promoted engineer who couldn't let go of the past. But what they didn't realize was that Ops gave me access. Deep access. I saw internal workflows, security logs, system audits, procurement chains. Things that touched every corner of the company, including Mantis. Especially Mantis. Turns out, when you bury someone in the basement, you forget how much of the building's foundation runs through it. I started small. I reread the last 6 months of Mantis update reports, buried in shared drive folders with naming conventions only an intern could love. I noticed patterns. Jason, the new PM, was pushing aggressive rollout schedules, too aggressive, cutting verification cycles, skipping redundancies, green-lighting untested firmware patches. Alan was signing off on them like a proud parent. From where I sat, it looked like they were rushing Mantis out the door to meet a public milestone. I knew why. Bonuses. If they hit initial delivery by Q3, the executive suite got their performance incentives. It wasn't about functionality. It was about optics. I flagged one of the issues, a data race condition in the telemetry module that could cause intermittent feedback loss during field operation, and quietly sent a note to QA, phrased as a question. Just wondering if this was still under review? That was all. No accusations. Just a breadcrumb. The kind you drop to see who's watching. The next morning, I got a ping from someone I hadn't talked to in months. Priya, one of the senior QA analysts I used to work with. She messaged me privately. "Did you really find that bug? Or are you poking the bear?" I told her the truth. I wasn't poking anything. I was just watching it wobble. Priya didn't press. But a few hours later, I noticed that the telemetry module was suddenly flagged in the next internal audit. Not publicly, but in the back-end logs. Someone had reopened it for review. The seed was planted. Now all I had to do was water it. That night, I stayed late, walking the empty halls like a ghost. I found a forgotten whiteboard in a disused team room, still covered in Mantis flight vector notes I'd scribbled months ago. I stood there for a long time, staring at my own handwriting. I wasn't ready to burn it down. Not yet. But I could feel the flame catching. The thing about systems, the ones made of wires, people, or both, is they don't collapse in one go. They crack, quietly, subtly. At first, it just looks like noise, a missed update, a delayed shipment, a skipped test. But when you know what to look for, when you built the system, you can feel it shifting beneath the surface. And that's what I did. I listened for the cracks. Jason was already drowning. I could see it in the way he spoke in meetings, all jargon, no substance. He was sharp with junior devs, overly chummy with Alan, and allergic to accountability. That's what made him dangerous. Not because he was smarter than me, but because he didn't care about the system. To him, Mantis was a career move, not a responsibility. And I knew exactly how to let that mindset do the damage for me. I never sabotaged anything, never touched code or leaked documents. That would have made me the villain. All I did was remove the safety nets. I stopped shielding them from their own recklessness. I knew Mantis inside out. The legacy modules they forgot about, the vendor APIs that weren't stress-tested, the debug routines that hadn't been hardened for real-world use, and I stopped offering quiet corrections. I let their shortcuts see daylight. When procurement pinged ops asking why the sensor arrays weren't shipping, I flagged the dependency chain in our internal system, knowing full well the new team hadn't updated it. When compliance asked about field safety logs, I copied the last unverified report and sent it along without comment. Nothing was forged. Nothing was hacked. It was all real, just incomplete, just messy enough to raise questions. And once those questions started, they fed on themselves. Word started spreading, not publicly, but through side-channel chatter, Slack messages, lunchroom whispers. QA was nervous. DevOps was covering their asses. Legal started asking about risk disclosures. All the while, Jason kept pushing full speed ahead, too proud or too blind to notice that his ship was leaking. And Alan? He was still busy crafting investor decks and dropping phrases like next-gen battlefield resilience, like confetti. Then came the internal review meeting, one of those bi-weekly alignment sessions that used to be my domain. I wasn't invited anymore, but Eva forwarded me the notes, probably out of habit. A line caught my eye. System latency anomalies noted during hot weather simulations. Recommend review before Demo 3. I smiled. I knew those anomalies. I had documented them a year ago and built a patch that never made it into the master branch because Alan said we didn't have the budget to validate edge conditions. Jason clearly didn't even know the issue existed. But now, it was live again. And this time, it had witnesses. That was the first time I realized something powerful. I didn't need to fight the system. I was the system. And they were trying to run it without the manual. They pinned everything on the Demo 3 showcase. It was supposed to be a tightly controlled test, a short field demo for internal stakeholders and a few government reps. A non-public, high-confidence demonstration, Alan called it. The kind of thing they could record, polish, and splice into sizzle reels for investors. Jason had been walking around all week with the confidence of a man who thought he was 10 minutes from a corner office. I just kept my head down in ops, pretending to care about server load metrics while quietly watching the storm build. I knew what was going to happen. The moment they scheduled the test for the Arizona site, I could see it all playing out. That location was notorious for signal degradation at low altitudes, something I'd documented extensively during Mantis 2.2 trials. Back then, we ran 2 redundant data links as a workaround. But Jason had stripped that out for efficiency, and Alan Green lit the change without consulting anyone who'd actually done field work. So when the drone lost signal mid-run, just 10 minutes into the showcase, I wasn't surprised. The feed froze, the heads-up display stuttered. Then, for 3 full seconds, Mantis lost uplink entirely. The drone didn't crash, but it hovered dumbly in place while everyone stared at the monitors, pretending it wasn't happening. Someone coughed. Jason mumbled something about packet latency. And then, just as suddenly as it had glitched, the connection returned. The demo limped through its final checkpoints, and the session ended with Alan smiling too hard and promising a few final tweaks before deployment. But the damage was done. Later that afternoon, I was sitting alone in the break room when Priya walked in. She didn't say anything at first, just poured her coffee, added way too much sugar, and sat across from me. Then she said, "They're scrambling. Legal's asking about failover specs. Engineering's on edge." I sipped my tea. That was the cleanest version of that failure. It gets worse under load. She looked at me. "You could fix it, couldn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. For the next few days, Mantis became a ghost. No updates in the usual channels. No new sprint notes. The team had gone dark, probably under strict orders to contain the fallout. But I saw the ripple effects in ops. Procurement froze on the next round of sensor orders. QA halted automation on the final test cycle. And the deployment schedule? Quietly pushed back a month, no announcement, just a silent admission of failure. And Alan? I passed him in the hallway that Friday. He gave me a nod, tight-lipped, like he wasn't sure if I was friend or threat. That was the moment I knew he suspected. Not that I'd sabotaged anything, because I hadn't, but that I'd known, that I'd watched it coming and didn't warn him. Good. Let him feel that. Let him wonder how much more I still knew. After the demo failure, the mood around the office shifted. People walked faster. Conversations got quieter. Slack messages turned sterile, like everyone suddenly remembered they could be screenshotted. Mantis, once the golden child of the company, had become radioactive. And me? I became a ghost, not gone, just everywhere. Silent, watching, still reassigned, still officially in ops, still smiling through pointless meetings. But now people avoided eye contact when they passed me in the hall. Jason tried to regain control. I could see him overcompensating. New process documents, aggressive sprint calendars, twice daily stand-ups. But the trust was gone. Once a system fails in public, no amount of pep talks can restore belief. Alan started showing up to meetings he used to delegate, and I heard through a back channel that he'd been called into a closed-door session with legal. Something about prior risk disclosures not being properly documented. I didn't do anything obvious. I didn't need to. I just let the ghosts whisper. Remember that vendor integration they cut corners on to meet their timeline? I casually misfiled an ops document that highlighted the missing compliance certification. Procurement found it 3 days later and triggered an internal audit. Remember the firmware patch Jason insisted was stable? I flagged a conflicting version number buried in the backup logs. No accusations, just a quiet, "Hey, is this the latest approved build?" It wasn't. Remember the thermal tests that never got validated past 100 degrees Fahrenheit? A curious facilities manager found an old test report on a shared drive I hadn't deleted yet. It showed system drift after long exposure. He passed it to legal, thinking it was a good faith heads up. Little ripples. Each one just enough to shake confidence. Not sabotage, not lies. Just the truth. Left out in the open where the right eyes would eventually see it. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not exactly. It was about correction. Balance. I wasn't going to let Alan and Jason spin my work into a rushed, broken product to fatten their bonuses. Mantis mattered. It could work, if it was treated with the care it deserved. But if they were going to bastardize it and cut corners, I'd make sure they paid the price for that choice. One night, I stayed late again. Same empty halls, same flickering ceiling lights. I passed the old lab, now locked unless you had special clearance. My badge didn't work there anymore, but I paused at the door anyway, hand resting on the sensor. Inside, I could just make out the shape of the drone rig under a tarp. Dust settling. Abandoned between test cycles. I thought about everything we built. The nights I slept on that ugly gray couch, living off vending machine snacks and bad coffee. All for what? To be erased by a couple of guys with better haircuts and less conscience? I stood there for a long time before walking away. They wanted me invisible. They thought they'd buried me. But I wasn't buried. I was rooted. The final collapse didn't happen with a bang. It came quietly, almost clinically. A sterile memo from risk management passed through too many hands before it landed in the open. Project MANTIS, suspended pending external review. No timeline, no reassurances, just silence. The kind that echoes down every hallway of a company too proud to admit it, tripped over its own ambition. Alan was transitioned 3 weeks later. That's how they put it in the all-hands email. No mention of Mantis, no farewell speech, not even a catered lunch. One day he was pacing the floor in his tailored blazer, eyes scanning for threats, and the next his nameplate was gone from the office door. Word was he'd signed a mutual NDA. Full payout, no lawsuits, no legacy. Jason lasted a little longer. He flailed, tried to pivot, claimed he'd inherited a broken project and done his best. But no one believed it.